All right. Well, in the interest of time, and for those that have joined us here, I think we should get started. I am Todd Nettesheim. I'm the Deputy Director of EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office. And I'm very excited to be here tonight to host our last virtual public engagement session. And in fact, our last planned public engagement session as well. It's been quite a tour that we've had over the last 2 months or so, which began in early June in Cleveland. So we're very excited to have, I think, close to 250 people register for the public engagement session tonight. So hopefully we have a good turnout and we get a lot of great input, because the purpose here is we want to hear from all of you. We don't want our team and myself to just talk on for 2 hours. Really, the purpose here is all of you. So again, this is the last virtual session, and I'm going to quickly cover tonight's agenda. So right now we are going through welcome. In about a minute or so, I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea to cover some Zoom logistics for everyone. After that, I will do a very brief overview of the GLRI and the action plans for the GLRI. And then we have some guest presenters that are going to join us and provide their local perspectives about their GLRI work and what GLRI has meant for them. So we've got a great lineup of guest presenters and very excited by that as well. But then in the last 90 minutes, this is really your time to provide input. We are going to cover each focus area. We'll have about 17 minutes to cover each focus area. We have subject matter experts, which we call focus area leads, which will provide a 3 to 5 minute overview of accomplishments and future directions, potential future directions that we intend to take under Action Plan 4. But then the bulk of that time is your ability to provide your input, to ask any questions as well. And there'll be an opportunity to ask questions both in the Q&A box and verbally as well. I know I'm infringing on Chelsea's role here. But again, we want to hear from all of you today. I also want to acknowledge that there may be some members of the press on this engagement session. There is an opportunity for interviews if desired, and I just ask that you contact Macy Presley. Her contact information should have been included in a media advisory that was issued, I believe, yesterday or the day before. We can also add her contact information into chat if anyone needs that information. And with that, I want to turn it over to Chelsea.
Thank you, Todd. So a few logistical notes for everyone today. You'll notice that you're muted for this meeting, but that does not mean that we don't want you to participate. There's going to be 2 ways that you can ask questions, submit comments during today's session. So the first one, if you'll take a minute to find the Q&A option in your Zoom room. If you're on a laptop or desktop, it's likely in the bottom bar. If you're on a smaller device like a phone, that may be in the ... more options. If you click in there, there is the Q&A box. You're able to submit questions, comments, concerns by name or anonymously there. And I'd also like you all to see, once we get a question, there's going to be an option for a thumbs up. You're able to upvote or like somebody else's submission. Please do that if somebody submits something that you're also curious about. That'll help us sort through the most pressing topics to cover today and address, because we do have a large number of participants. We might not be able to get to each and everything submitted, although everything will be recorded and available for the whole EPA team to work on for the next action plan. So the written comments and Q&A are one way to participate this evening. The other is if you prefer to participate verbally, so ask a question out loud. Once we get to that portion of the agenda, there is the raise hand feature. So again, that same black bar that you have, look for reactions. It's going to have the smiley face. There's the raise hand function. So you'll be able to raise your hand. When we've got time for questions, then we'll call on you. You'll be asked to unmute and able to ask that question out loud. The chat box here, you're only able to chat with a few folks, and that is really intended for help. So if you're having technical difficulties, you can't find anything, shoot me, Chelsea Maupin, a message, and I will help sort you out throughout this meeting. You'll also see messages from us, links to information, links to the email address if you want to submit comments after this meeting or during this meeting, but not in such a public context. A few other notes: this meeting is being recorded, as the Zoom voice likely announced to you as you came into the room. A recording of this presentation will be available on glri.us. That file will include a polished closed caption file for accessibility, and that'll likely be posted just after the Labor Day holiday. And we'll drop a link to where that will live eventually. We've also enabled captions for this evening's meeting. So if you prefer to have the live transcription up while you are listening today, again, go to that menu bar and find the show captions option, and you can enable that on your own device. All right, I think those are all the logistics. Again, if you're having any technical problems with Zoom, please feel free to chat Chelsea. Back to you, Todd.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea. Great overview. I learn a thing about Zoom every time you do that overview, so thank you. Before we begin here, I just want to do a tribal acknowledgement. The Great Lakes Basin is the homeland of 35 federally recognized tribal governments in the United States, and tens of thousands of Native Americans live throughout the Great Lakes Basin and call it home. Many of these tribal nations maintain special treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather beyond the borders of the reservations. We recognize their rights and their ancient connections to this land. We value our partnerships with the tribes in implementing the GLRI, and we acknowledge their considerable contributions to protecting and restoring our shared treasure. All right, so now we're going to cover the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or what we like to call the GLRI. So first, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So this began in 2010, and it's built off years and years, if not decades, of work that has been done by a lot of different people and organizations. And when I took a quick peek at the participant list, many of you are those partners that have done work in the Great Lakes for years, if not decades. So thank you for that. The environmental problems were well documented. Heavily degraded areas, also known as areas of concern or AOCs, invasive species, excess nutrient loads to the Great Lakes, habitat degradation, just to name a few. But it wasn't really until 2010 where Congress appropriated $475 million and created what is now known as the GLRI, that we were really able to accelerate and build upon all of the planning and efforts that went on since the 1970s across the Great Lakes. It was really a game changer. Since that time in 2010, the GLRI has been funded by Congress at about $300 million per year. But in the last few years, that number has increased up to $368 million this fiscal year. I would like to think that the increasingly generous contributions for the GLRI from appropriations from Congress is really noting the success of the program and the results that the program is achieving. And when I say we, that the program and we are achieving, I mean all of you. It has been, this partnership-based approach of everyone working together in common goals that has really made the GLRI successful. And I can't leave the funding story without even talking about the $1 billion that Congress appropriated to the GLRI under the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2022. That funding is spread out equally over 5 fiscal years through fiscal year 2026. So it's a great amount of resources to date, and also a great amount of resources going forward under the bipartisan infrastructure law, and hopefully under future appropriations as well, to accomplish great work under the GLRI. To date, these resources have funded over 7,500 projects, totaling almost $4 billion. I won't go into each and every project. That would take too long, and I won't even go into a couple projects. That's why we have our guest presenters here today to talk about a few examples. And we also have our focus area leads, which will summarize some of the key successes and accomplishments we've achieved under the GLRI. So again, I want to note that the GLRI does not work without everyone working together in real effective partnerships. The GLRI, although it is led by EPA and led by the federal agencies under the regional working group, which consists of 16 federal agencies, it's really the partnerships that starts at that federal level that is also very strong partnerships with our 8 Great Lakes states. Our 35 federally recognized tribal nations collectively have built these real strong working relationships and strong commitments to accomplish real environmental improvement in the Great Lakes. In addition, we partner very closely with a number of non-governmental organizations, academia, local communities, local governments, industry. We even have the Great Lakes Advisory Board with representatives volunteering and dedicating their time and expertise to make the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative as effective as possible. Again, the GLRI works because we're all working together towards a common goal. And that gets me to the action plan. The action plan is what lays out these common goals. So what is an action plan? So up on the screen, you should all see a slide that shows the cover of the 3 action plans that we've had under the GLRI. Starting on the far right was the first one that was finalized in 2011 that covered fiscal years 2010 through 2014. We then had an action plan 2, which covered 2015 through 2019. And we're currently operating under Action Plan 3, which covers fiscal years 2020 through 2024. These aren't extensive documents. These aren't 500-page documents detailing each and every last thing that we need to accomplish and or have accomplished under the GLRI. It's really only about 30, 35 pages long. And really, in a nutshell, is what it is. It's our 5-year blueprint of what we want to accomplish under the GLRI. In a nutshell, it includes objectives, high-level objectives on what we want to achieve. Sorry about that. My light turns off if I don't move. And it includes commitments, how we intend to accomplish those high-level objectives, and then measures of progress. And that is in 5 focus areas: AOCs, invasive species, nutrients, habitat, education, and science. I gave the shorthand for that. The official titles are the titles that you see on the screen here. And the reason we're all here together today is we want your help to inform Action Plan 4, which will cover 2025 through 2029. We want it to be even better than Action Plan 3. And a big part of our progress is getting input from all of our stakeholders. So we definitely want to hear from you today. Don't be shy. Please provide any input. And if you're just learning about the GLRI today, you'll have an opportunity to follow up and provide input via an email address that will be provided at some point during this webinar. Before we get into the very detailed component of the agenda, I just wanted to make reference to 2 things, and that is environmental justice and climate resiliency. So first, environmental justice. So I think a lot of people know environmental justice is a very high priority for this administration, and EPA is heavily invested in environmental justice. There's large work being done across the agency, not just within our Great Lakes National Program Office. We want to make sure that the restoration and protection activities that are done under GLRI are done in an equitable way. What that means is we want to ensure that those communities that have environmental justice concerns, those that may have not historically been involved in the GLRI, can see the benefits of GLRI, just as many other communities have seen the benefits of GLRI since its inception. So we want that better reflected in Action Plan 4. So as we go through tonight's agenda and you have an opportunity to provide input or ask questions related to the focus areas, I ask that you take special note of how we can better incorporate environmental justice into the action plan. And it's not just the type of work that we do, but it can also be, how we perform that work. How do we ensure that we have strong partnerships with communities that we may not have had, partnerships with in the past, and how that may be reflected in Action Plan 4. So please share your ideas. Before I get into climate change, I want to put out a shameless plug for our environmental justice RFA that hit the streets in, I believe it was May of this year. We've recently extended the deadline for that request for applications. And this EJRFA is to establish Great Lakes environmental justice grant programs. The deadline to do so is September 15th. And if there's anyone on my team or with good marketing that can put a link out to in the chat for people that may not be familiar with that grant program. So again, a new deadline to submit applications of September 15th. And then just very briefly on climate change, obviously a very important issue. We hear a lot about this issue almost on a daily basis. And we're experiencing it in our personal lives and in our professional lives more and more frequently. So it goes without saying that we want to hear from you about climate change and how that can also be better incorporated into Action Plan 4. So before I get into our guest speakers, I just want to remind you first and again that this webinar is for you. We want to hear your ideas before we draft the next action plan. So this next plan is better than the last. So begin, what are your ideas? Please share those with us tonight. Please share those with us, in a variety of different ways after this meeting as well. So tonight, my hope is that we have so many ideas and so many people wanting to share input that we're not able to get to everyone. Not that I don't want to get to everyone, but what that means is everyone is got great ideas to share. So I just want to let you know if for some reason we do get input, and as I'm facilitating the sessions later, if I don't get to your comment, I'm not able to read it, doesn't mean we're not going to capture and consider it. We most definitely will. But we're trying to stay within our 2-hour time slot. And then although this is the final engagement session, this is not your final opportunity. Additional ideas can be shared with the GLRI Action Plan 4.epa.gov web or email address. And we ask for those to be submitted by the end of this month, if possible. If you're joining this call and GLRI, you're just learning about, but you have other concerns that relate to EPA, we welcome those too. We may not be able to address them here on this call, but please share those concerns in the Q&A box, and we will ensure that someone within EPA can at least get back to you and discuss what that issue is. So with that, I want to turn to our guest presenters who will provide their localized perspective of GLRI. And I'm very excited to announce the 3 presenters that we have, and I'll do so in order just before each individual presents. So first up, we have Jessica Jock. She's the program manager for the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, and she's going to talk about GLRI efforts in the St. Lawrence River area of concern. So take it away, Jessica. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Todd, and my EPA friends. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for the invitation to speak on behalf of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe's Environment Division. We can go ahead and bring up the slides. There we go. I'm always happy to talk about our GLRI work in the St. Lawrence River area of concern at Messina, Akwesasne. For those who aren't familiar with the St. Lawrence River area of concern, just as a quick locator map and geo reference, we are at the most downstream and the furthest east of the Great Lakes watershed. And we're here in northern New York, and the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe is the federally recognized tribal government for the U.S. domestic portion of the area of concern, but our area of concern is actually a binational area of concern. So the Mohawks of Akwesasne actually are within the St. Lawrence River, including land and treaty right territories and islands in Northern New York and provinces of Ontario and Quebec. But for today's purpose of discussion, we're going to focus just on the U.S. domestic portion. That includes portions of the Grass River, the Racket River, the St. Regis River, and the St. Lawrence River, all also known as the AOC at Messina-Akwesasne. So moving on to some of the discussions of what our 2023 projects are under our co-coordination. So the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe is also in a unique position in the areas of concern under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. We are the only state tribe co-coordinators of our AOC. And with this collaboration effort, we do work with our state partners on many of our projects, but for today, I'm just going to discuss our 3 projects that we have ongoing right now in 2023, focused on Focus Area 1, our areas of concern, and what's discussed in Action Plan 3 as 1.1 objectives and 1.1 commitments. So if you're not familiar with the lingo, I apologize, but we often talk about the objective to remediate, restore, and to list areas of concern, and then what that means with implementing management actions for beneficial use impairments, or BUIs. But in simplified terms, we have contaminated sediment sites, right, from historic industrial discharges. And while we have great activities ongoing under Superfund, these are just processes to help restore some of the other beneficial uses in the AOC. So the 3 projects of discussion today are freshwater mussel propagation and reseeding. That's considered a management action under our BUI number 6. You can see in the photos on the bottom left, our primary targets, and I'll talk a little bit more in a couple of slides about mussels in particular, but our primary targets are 3 mussels that are existing in the lower Grass River that was affected by remediation, and we receive funding to do propagation and reseeding, where we grow out our own juvenile mussels and place them back in the habitat for restoration. We have a phenomenal team of St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Environment Division staff, and we partner and collaborate with a number of agencies, including Fish and Wildlife Service and DEC, and we incorporate Indigenous knowledge holders from the Mohawk community and different practitioners to implement our lake sturgeon acoustic telemetry work. The funding that we have ongoing currently from GLRI is going to deploy 18 acoustic receivers in our area of concern and up to 120 acoustic tags for adult lake sturgeon, with the emphasis on monitoring lake sturgeon populations and habitat use, and trying to identify where adult spawning activities are occurring within our area of concern, so that way we can restore them or protect them, as well as from a cultural perspective, integrate how Mohawk use of lake sturgeon is important for determining our management actions and restoration actions. The additional photos show some plants which we consider medicinal or traditional food value plants. Again, we work with our community members, and we've worked on some unique ways to integrate Mohawk Indigenous knowledge into our scientific sampling plans, so that way we can restore and replant and also evaluate different contaminant pathways that haven't always been understood fully for our BUI number 1 for fish and wildlife consumption. So that way we could work with the public and the community of restoring awareness of, are the plants and medicines and cultural cultural species such as turtles and others safe to consume or use in ceremony. The turtles, so some of our focus with this new project that's coming up with integrating the Mohawk TEK into our BUI assessment, we'll also, under a cultural lens, look at the different clan species that are significant to Mohawk and Haudenosaunee people. We will implement what's also considered the Haudenosaunee environmental protection process, integrating the cultural and traditional values into those methods. And so as we continue into our different projects and we talk about the Grass River specifically, the Lower Grass River has been a Superfund site and has undergone different remedial activities between 2019 and 2021. And this project, while it's relative to all the BUIs and not just the fish and the wildlife and some of the cultural practices of the plants for the areas of Indian Meadows, for the brief description I'm providing now, the focus is on our freshwater mussel propagation and reseeding activities. So the remedial activities that took place recently, you can see from this figure provided here that there was a number of river miles that were affected by armored capping, is displayed in the blue shadow. And then there's like this green color that's a modified armored cap, and then a sand cap in the majority of the river stretch. And this represents 7.2 river miles. And then there is nearshore dredging and backfill, and then some lower river reach dredging. Basically, the concern with this in terms of our freshwater mussel community and habitat was that it significantly altered the habitat that was there, significantly impacted the mussels community that have been there historically before construction activities, thereby projections of impacting over 1.2 million mussels, freshwater mussels. So, as well as the habitat. So some of our management actions that we're implementing include mussel propagation and reseeding, and also the restoring of the habitat and creating biosubstrate to place on the remediated areas to improve habitat for the freshwater mussel and benthic community. For those who are familiar with BUIs, that would be directly related to BUI number 6. So if you can go ahead and move into the cycle of the freshwater mussels. So what's unique about the project that the San Andres Mohawk Tribe is funded to do with freshwater mussel propagation and reseeding is that it's a very technical process that requires both the adult mussels and a unique fish host for that mussel. So on the left of this slide, you can see an image that shows the in-river natural reproduction process, and it includes a mussel on the riverbed that releases its glaucidia into the water column. It then goes into the transport fit through the fish gills, and then will settle out in the natural environment in the river. But to do this manually, in the photos to the right, we have to collect the adult gravid mussels from the wild and make sure that they're gravid, remove the glaucidia and do a water bath with the appropriate fish host. And then within 30 days, the glaucidia, as they attach to the gills of the fish, we keep them in-house for 30 days until they drop off. And then from there, we grow them out in an aquaculture facility for up to 3 to 4 months until they're large enough size to be reseeded. And why this is important is because those 1.2 million mussels impacted by remedy do provide a very important ecosystem service to the environment. And we want to try to restore their populations, not just in species diversity, but in numbers in an expedited way than what would occur naturally after remedy impact. I did want to just note real briefly that St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, to the best of my knowledge, and in consultation with my state colleague friends, that we are the first in New York State to successfully propagate and grow out and reseed live juvenile mussels into a water body. So we're quite proud of that, and I'm proud of my team and the collaboration efforts that we have with our partners, Fish and Wildlife Service, Genoa National Fish Hatchery as well. So with that, that's the close of my presentation, and I don't know if we're taking questions now or after, but thank you.
So I think we're gonna just move on to the next presentation. Jessica, thank you so much, and such great work that you're doing up there at the St. Lawrence River Area of Concern. So well done, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna move next to Paige Wiegren. She's the lead outdoor education program specialist with the Girl Scouts of America, and she's gonna talk about her work in the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge. Take it away, Paige.
Thank you, Todd. Awesome to hear, Jessica, too, that you're going to be adding to the GLaDOS network. That's exciting. So as Todd said, my name is Paige Wiegren, and I run our Outdoor and Environmental Education Department for the Girl Scouts of Southeastern Michigan Council. I am tasked with bringing unique and engaging outdoor ed and environmental ed experiences to our 16,000 plus Girl Scouts and Council throughout the southeast corner of Michigan. I'm here today to speak about two amazing GLRI-funded fisheries-based education programs that I co-authored with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, and how several Girl Scouts and their chaperones have positively benefited from the experience. The two programs that I will be discussing are A Day in the Life of a Fisheries Biologist and DRIFT, our Detroit River Youth Fishing Team. You can go to next slide. And it's to point out too, we're focusing on GLRI Focus Area 5, that's our education, so this will be a little less sciencey. So to discuss our A Day in the Life of a Fish Bio program first, this program was our original GLRI grant request and officially got off the ground running in early summer of 2022 with our first Girl Scout pilot group. The program was designed to expose youth to possible career pathways in a natural resource fields. We start the event in a classroom setting led by two fisheries biologists. They discuss how they chose their current career path and their path, how they got there. We make sure to have a traditional path, a degree in environmental sciences or biology, master's degree, further education, and then a non-traditional path as well. Just to show kids, you don't have to, there's no right way to get to a fisheries-based career or natural resources-based career. From there, we dive into fisheries sampling types, why we want to collect biological data, and what we hope to get from the information. We go through basic fish anatomy and identification as well. We also work through a simple dichotomous key in a controlled classroom setting so that they can have the basics when we head out to the field. After we get the somewhat school-like classroom stuff out of the way, we actually head out to the field. Previous to hosting the event, the night before, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Fisheries staff, they go out and they set single fyke nets and minnow traps on our sample water body. So we have participants break down into groups with their assigned fisheries biologists. They are then able to pull and process their very own minnow trap, and they work together as a group to pull and process a single fyke net. We use simplified data sheets and a custom created dichotomous key to work through our catch. To date, we have hosted 6 A Day in the Life of a Fisheries Biologist programs for a total of 150 4th through 12th grade Girl Scouts, with an additional 4 workshops already planned for 2024. Outside of Girl Scouts, this program is in the process of being offered to the general public, targeting underserved minority youth groups starting in September 2023, with plans to take this program on the road. And what's really unique about this is it's going to be place-based education, so we can actually come to your own backyard and you can experience what fish are there and how you could get involved. So next slide, please. This second program I'm going to talk about is our Detroit River Youth Fishing Team, or DRIFT. This was our second and largest GLRI funding request and was designed to create a mobile aquatic ecology and fishing lab. We had a custom covered trailer made, wrapped in awesome fishing graphics designed by a local artist, and then we outfitted it with shoreline, deep water and river fishing, fly fishing, and even ice fishing gear. We also included aquatic ecology supplies, covering water quality, macroinvertebrate collection, and watershed site assessment materials. This program is designed to offer 2 types of programming. The first is a Try It fishing clinic. This is the program that over 250 Girl Scouts have benefited from since the program got off the ground running in July 2023. We teach participants the mechanics of a fishing pole, how to rig their fishing pole, tackle basics, and how to match the tackle to the type of water you are trying to fish, how to bait your hook and bait selection, a few types of casting, and then they actually get to fish themselves. While they are fishing, we go over ethical fishing practices and proper fish handling techniques, as well as basic fish ID, if we're successful. To make this a year-round program, we have also incorporated ice fishing as a winter try-it fishing event. For Girl Scout specific programming, we send them home with their own fishing pole and tackle box at the end of the event in an effort to break the equipment barrier in hopes it is a little easier to continue their newfound hobby. The second program being fulfilled from this funding is a mobile day-long camp where participants complete a site assessment reviewing human impacts on the watershed and overall health, water quality measurements, and macroinvertebrate sampling. After the aquatic ecology portion of the camp is completed, we incorporate the same try-it fishing curriculum that I previously mentioned. Day camp participants are also sent home with their own fishing pole and tackle box at the end of the event. This camp curriculum is almost in its final stage, and we are planning on offering our first one in late September at the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge in Trenton, Michigan. Next slide, please. So 2022 was our first year for our Day in the Life of a Fisheries Biologist program, and 2023 is our first year running the drift programs. To date, we have been able to teach about 400 kids the importance of Great Lakes conservation through funding based off of GLRI. Both programs have received overwhelming positive feedback, with requests coming in from multiple youth-based organizations throughout the state. We have big plans to take both of these programs on the road during the 2024 season. If you would like to see a program offered in your community, please do not hesitate to send me an email and reach out, and we can get something scheduled.
Great. Thank you, Paige. What incredible programs that you have there. Thank you so much for sharing with us. In the interest of time, I think we're going to transfer to our next local presenter. And we have Holly Best, a park manager with the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And she's going to talk about her work in Presque Isle State Park related to invasive species and native plant restoration. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you, Todd. Yes, as mentioned, my name is Holly Best. I'm one of the assistant park managers at Presque Isle State Park. Just to tell you a little bit about the location, this can be shown by the first slide. Presque Isle State Park is one of 124 state parks in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're located on the southern shores of Lake Erie, right at the city of Erie in Erie, Pennsylvania. Presque Isle is by far the most visited Pennsylvania state park. We host over 1 million visitors per year. I'm sorry, over 4 million visitors per year. The park is very dynamic. It's a 3,200 acre recurving sand spit that juts out into Lake Erie. We have many recreational opportunities, including swimming, walking, biking, hiking, boating, kayaking, bird watching, pleasure driving, just to name a few. The park is designated as a national natural landmark, as it is home to many state and nationally ranked rare, threatened, and endangered species of flora and fauna. It is Pennsylvania's only beach and shoreline. We have every successional stage from New Beach all the way up to Climax Forest. The park is also along many migration routes for birds and insects, and it's identified as an important bird area. Next, I'm going to show you and tell you a little bit about our program itself, which is wetland restoration. This is our project in a nutshell. It's going to be very brief, but hopefully I touch on all the points. The park has been battling invasive species since the early 1990s. At that time, we were equipped with only a couple park interns and hand tools. Since 2009, we have been successfully receiving grant funding through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. So we've received funding since the very beginning. We have worked with many partners over the years, and we could not do what we have done without our funding from GLRI. We have received millions of dollars over the years to fund staff, supplies, and equipment. The project has evolved into a very well-rounded wetland restoration project that includes, first of all, monitoring. There's a monitoring arm that we monitor before, during, and after. We do any invasive species control, and we monitor for fish, amphibians, macros, mussels, and plants. We also then control invasive species through all different means. Mostly we use manual removal and herbicide application. We use all the different forms of application method, whether that's the very small close-up glove of death application method, using our backpacks, tank sprayers, or even having a helicopter come. We hire summer interns and utilize park staff in the fall. And we also have volunteer weed warriors who operate throughout the growing season. Finally, we propagate native vegetation from seeds and cuttings that are collected from the park. We're very proud that we don't purchase any growing material at all. It's all harvested from the park and put back onto the park. We raise it in the greenhouse at the Tom Ridge Environmental Center. We move it then to the cold frame site on the park, and then we utilize park staff and volunteers to plant it. The final image will show you some of our success stories. We've had a lot of different success with the projects over the years. Annually, we work on an average of 500 acres of parkland. We monitor it and remove any invasive plants that we locate. Once the work is started, it's necessary to continue monitoring and performing treatments, or else any of those footholds and successes we have gained will be lost. Since the beginning of this project, we have seen the return of nesting bald eagles and Great Lakes piping plovers, and an increase in marsh birds like the least bittern and common gallinule. We have first-time nesting osprey. Currently, we have 4 active nests, and we have increased the view shed into the wetlands and lagoon system so that visitors can see more wildlife and plants. Just this past January, we documented the first ever family of river otter, who are now calling the lagoon system home. Every year, we are monitoring the previously treated areas and ensuring that any of our new or returning populations of invasives are removed, as well as pushing into those previously untreated areas. We call it just peeling back the layers of the onion. We just move into those big infestations and just peel back the next layer. We have fully reclaimed Leo's Landing. You can see in the images from 2012 to 2022. And we also found a pond, which we call Surprise Pond. We found it in about 2013. So you can see the image in 2009 and 2022 that we've reclaimed that wetland area. We cannot do any of this work without Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding. The partners we have worked with over the years have enabled us to reclaim the park, and we are seeing native vegetation that is returning to the park after sometimes up to 50 years of being choked out by invasive plants. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Those are incredible before and after photos there. So thank you for sharing. And thank you again to all of our guest presenters, Jessica, Paige, and Holly. These are just examples of these partnerships and all of the work being accomplished by everyone across the basin to make the GLRI a success. So again, in the interest of time, we are going to go right into our focus area portion of the agenda. And this is the time we want to hear from all of you. And first, I am going to introduce Amy Pelka with EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office, and she is going to provide a short presentation on Focus Area 1.
Hello. All right,
Amy.
so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. All right. So my name is Amy Pelka. I'm a section supervisor at the EPA and the Focus Area Sub-Lead for Areas of Concern part of Focus Area 1. And this focus area includes areas of concern as well as contaminants in the Great Lakes. So I think we can go to the next slide. All right. Areas of concern are locations around the Great Lakes that the US and Canada identified in the 1980s as having significant environmental degradation. And on the US side, there were 31 areas of concern, or AOCs, and through the cleanup and restoration, 6 of these AOCs have been delisted. Currently, federal, state, and local partners are focusing comprehensive cleanup and restoration efforts to restore the 25 remaining US areas of concern. Work is ongoing, and we anticipate by the start of Action Plan 4, cleanup work is expected to be completed at up to 17 areas of concern. We anticipate completing over 60 projects, including remediating millions of cubic yards of polluted mud where legacy contamination remains, and creating new habitat for fish and wildlife. These efforts will cut in half the number of identified ecological impairments, known as beneficial use impairments, which indicate a restoration of multiple measures of ecological health. Under Action Plan 4, we plan to continue our efforts to reach the moonshot goal of completing work all the remaining work in 22 of the 25 AOCs by 2030. As I noted, this focus area, which I think we can go to the next slide. Yep. As I noted, this focus area also includes contaminants in the Great Lakes. Chemical contaminants are important stressors to monitor and assess. Specifically, we support the development of effective outreach materials, communicating advice for consuming Great Lakes fish, wildlife, and harvested plant resources. This includes considerations for vulnerable populations who have higher consumption rates. We also support the monitoring and assessment of priority contaminants and their impact within the Great Lakes. I am joined also today by Derek Ager, who is the focus area sublead for chemical contaminants. And we welcome your thoughts on how our work should continue.
All right, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Derek, for being here. I want to direct everyone's attention to the chat right now, where there are links that have some additional information on Great Lakes areas of concern and Great Lakes contaminants. This is information that we have passed out at our in-person public engagement sessions. But now we want to hear from all of you. What I am going to do is I have both my participant list up and I have my Q&A box open, and I'm just going to kind of go back and forth. So if you do want to speak verbally, please raise your hand, or you can add something to the Q&A box, either a comment or a question. So I'm going to go directly to the Q&A box to start with. And I see that we have a question here from Jane Benson. And Jane, I'm going to just go forward and read your question here and turn it over to, I believe, Derek to provide some comments. So I live in Green Bay. The Bay of Green Bay is the largest freshwater estuary in the world. We are seeing growing contamination of PFAS, otherwise known as forever chemicals, in the Bay, especially near Peshtigo and Marinette because of firefighting foam contamination. Is PFAS one of the chemical contaminants being considered or monitored? So Derek, I'd like to turn it over to you to address that question.
Yeah, thanks, Todd, and thanks, Jane, for your question. Short answer is yes. PFAS is one of, if not the most or greatest concern we have with contaminants right now. And we have worked with the state of Wisconsin to fund a PFAS assessment. We've also worked with federal agencies such as USGS to monitor PFAS in tributaries. Alongside those efforts, we also fund some of the great GLEMPO's long-term monitoring programs, where we have begun to incorporate PFAS into our monitoring programs, such as fish, air deposition, and Great Lakes sediment. So it is definitely on the top of our minds, and we will continue to find opportunities to support PFAS monitoring in the environment.
Great, thank you, Derek. I think next I'd like to turn it over to someone to provide some verbal feedback. Stephen Modell, I think you had your hand up first, and I'd like to turn it over to you. So Chelsea, if you can ask him to unmute his line.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Stephen.
Stephen Modell. I live in Ann Arbor, and I'm also a member of the American Public Health Association Action Board. I have two questions. The first has to do with mussels. A couple of years back, I was swimming in a lake where the mussels were mostly displaced by zebra mussels. And the consequence for me was that after about 2 days of swimming, I became highly allergic to the larvae in the lake and a lot of redness and swelling. And that was the health consequence of the displacement of the original mussels that existed. But I would like to know from the first speaker what either the health or the natural advantages are of making sure that the original mussels exist or replaced into the location they were at.
Thank you for that question, Stephen. And when you mentioned the first speaker, I'm guessing you had mentioned or were intending that to be Jessica Jock with the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe?
Or I'm thinking of the speaker discussing St. Lawrence tributaries. Yes, Jessica.
So Jessica, are you still on the line, and are you able to address that question from Stephen?
Well, I don't know if I can address his entire question, but from where we are on the St. Lawrence River, we do have drassenids, invasive zebra mussels, quagga mussels that affect the St. Lawrence River. But in the tributaries that I was specifically mentioning, the lower Grass River, we have very healthy native freshwater mussel populations and assemblages there. They have been, from backwater effects from the St. Lawrence, been affected by invasive drassenids, but not to the point of where the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence have had those impacts. So with that, I would just say that what we look at is keeping that population of native mussels present for the water quality benefits because of their water quality filtering services and denitrification services. In terms of health of the people, we view that as long as the water quality is good, then that improves the quality for the people. But I don't know if that answers your question, so I apologize if not.
So,
Yes,
so
yeah.
thank you, Jessica, and Stephen, thank you for that question. If you did want to follow up directly with someone with EPA on that question, feel free to send an email to the GLRI Action Plan 4 email address, both with your comments and input related to this issue, but if there is any follow-up questions that you have. So I would like to remind everyone of the feature to give a thumbs up on the Q&A box if you want to see some questions elevated and addressed first. We're going to stay on with the hands raised, and I don't know who was first, but on my participant list, it's Nicole Biber. So Chelsea, if you can ask Nicole to unmute her line, she can take it away.
Bonjour, Nicole and Jessica's so I'm a turtle clan, so it's really nice to see all the turtles, and I'm a tribal citizen of the Little Tribal Band of Odawa. I'm living in East Lansing, Michigan, but our homelands are up by Harbor Springs. So I did give a thumbs up to the question about line 5, and certainly what comes to mind for me is when we're looking at areas of concern, it's really important to avoid future areas of concern. I think especially at a place like where the straits are and the the catastrophe that a spill or an explosion or what have you would be at line 5, and even with the tunnel project, there's a lot of problems with that. If we think about Bay Mills tribe, they are very much wanting Enbridge gone and out of there, and part of the plan for the tunnel would contaminate those waters to where it would damage the whitefish population. And so I know that I've been telling my daughter, like, this is such a nice webinar, because usually I think a lot of people in this room are probably pretty stressed about all the threats and the dangers. So it's really great to see these cleanup efforts. But I kind of wanted to segue over talking about whitefish, thinking about species and animal species and that sort of restoration effort, and how many ecological services they provide. And I wonder how the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative could most expediently be applied to help usher in a new day of how animal species and wildlife overall is viewed, and to have it be more of a understanding that we're in relationship with them. And one example that comes to mind of what I want to uplift is issue is thinking about wetlands and how wetlands have such an important role in the health of our waters. And, even for inland people like me, when we look at our rivers, I see a lot more green on rivers lately from runoff and whatnot. But thinking about beaver, who's a mick in our language, that they really do the best job in a lot of ways of wetland restoration. Their task at hand is keepers of rivers and of river health. And they never drew a line on a map and said, this is the river. They've always been changeable. Rivers have the only problem that I think a beaver, could be seen to have on a river is this idea that somehow the map that was drawn at some random time would be what a river is. So the problem I wanted to bring up is when wildlife species are seen as nuisances, and quite literally just this past May, the Michigan DNR put the beaver on a list of nuisance species, which allows for just people who say like they're damaging property to be able to kill them. There's not an expert that needs to be consulted with. It was a long list of animal species who we call relative that were included on this list that are going to be integral to any sort of sustained advances made. They all have a lot of important work that they do. They don't have a voice for it, but without our relatives and our animal species, one, we don't have a way to measure success if we think about frogs, but all the things that frogs do, all the things beaver do, are so important. And I wonder if part of the initiative can be sort of leveraged to say these animal species are really important and are going to be central to any ongoing success to have their habitat and their lives respected.
So Nicole, thank you. I think that there's a lot of excellent comments in that comment overall. I just want to briefly touch upon line 5. I will say that, this is the last public engagement session we've had. We've had 5 in-person ones. This is the second virtual. We got lots of great feedback, really impassioned feedback at the in-person ones, particularly in Superior, Wisconsin. And in Milwaukee, Wisconsin as well. And we've definitely taken note of that feedback and the strong concerns that, in particular, the tribal nation has with respect to line 5. So I just want to make sure that I did note that element of your comment. And with respect to the whitefish and beavers and frogs, I think great comments that we will definitely consider as we move forward in Action Plan 4. We do have your comment registered in the recording of this, but I would encourage you to also follow up with something in writing as well that may have a bit more detail as well. So we're very quickly running out of time for this focus area. We can come back to questions and hands raised, but what I would like to do is just address one of the Q&As before we move on to focus area 2. And this question and comment is coming from Kate Hutchins. The comment is for outreach in regards to consumption of Great Lakes fish to communities that do more subsistence fishing. How does GLRI prioritize building partnership with those communities and engaging in various languages? For example, in Detroit, outreach should include Spanish, Arabic, Bengali, and more. I'm wondering if either Derek and or Amy could address that question briefly, and then we can move on to focus area 2. And for those individuals that have your hands raised, Mary and there was another gentleman that had his hand raised before. Hopefully we'll have a time to come back to your input later on in the session.
Yeah,
Take
I
it
can
away,
take this.
Derek. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So when we talk about, folks that we want to reach with our outreach material, we really focus on the vulnerable populations. So folks who fish and eat fish subsistently is definitely one of our focuses. And a lot of the time, English is not their first language. So most of the grants we provide are to the states. So for example, the states of New York and Ohio and Wisconsin have really looked at how to reach these populations, not only by just translating the materials into these different languages, but also how do these populations best consume that information. So for example, New York has a large Hmong population that fish in many of the Great Lakes tributaries. And they did a great research project and found that videos were one of, if not the best ways to reach this population. So they've developed a media campaign that they're starting this year. And so definitely can, this will spark a conversation with the state of Michigan, which we can talk with them more about their efforts in translating material in the Detroit area. But appreciate the question, Kate, and definitely something on our mind, how to better communicate the risks and benefits of eating fish in the Great Lakes.
Great. Thank you, Derek. And Kate, great comment and input. Very much appreciated. For the other questions, we're going to hit pause on those. And same with the hands raised. And we're going to move on to focus area 2. And I'm going to introduce Kevin O'Donnell from EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office. Take it away, Kevin.
All right, thanks, Todd. Good evening, everyone. As Todd said, my name is Kevin O'Donnell. I'm a scientist with EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office in Chicago, and I serve as the lead for this GLRI focus area. Now, this invasive species focus area includes preventing invasive species establishment in the Great Lakes Basin, limiting or containing the spread of invasive species when they are first identified in the Great Lakes, and then controlling invasive species strategically where they are established. This focus area primarily targets aquatic invasive species, but also supports terrestrial invasive species activities when those activities are a direct benefit to Great Lakes habitats and species. Now, over time, approximately 190 non-native species have been found in the Great Lakes, entering through various means, such as connecting channels, canals and waterways, ballasted water in commercial ships, intentional or unintentional release of aquarium bait or aquaculture, and recreational boating. Now, about 1/3 of those 190 non-native species are considered invasive, causing socioeconomic, ecological, or human health impacts. Now, specific impacts include invasive species choking recreational waterways, changes to wetlands by invasive plants, limiting future use by fish, birds, and residents of the Great Lakes, destruction of mature riparian forest by forests, and then subsequent loss of cold water fisheries, and direct parasitism by lamprey on native fish important to recreational, cultural, and commercial fishing. So GLRI funding supports federal, tribal, and state agencies, as well as their local partners, to enhance sites degraded by aquatic, wetland, and terrestrial invasive species. Funding made available by GLRI also allows for collaborative and innovative approaches to invasive species management, advancing our knowledge on the most effective and efficient ways to reverse impact. Now, some of our achievements under GLRI when it comes to preventing invasive species include keeping silver and bighead carp out of the Great Lakes Basin. We've identified species most likely to present a threat to the Great Lakes in the future if they were introduced, and sharing that information with our critical partners. We've established a Great Lakes-wide monitoring network to screen for non-native species. And some of our future goals include to continue to prevent invasive carp from invading and establishing within the Great Lakes, continue to educate Great Lakes residents about the impact of non-native species and how they can play a role in preventing their spread, and continuing to monitor for the presence of non-native species in specific hotspots of the Great Lakes. Next slide. Some of our achievements under GLRI in this focus area when it comes to controlling invasive species that are already present in the basin. We've controlled strategically the spread of various aquatic invasive plant species. One example would be hydrilla, an aggressive aquatic invasive plant found in eastern portions of our Great Lakes Basin. We've controlled sea lamprey to protect lake trout, as well as recreational fishing in the Great Lakes. We've implemented pilot approaches that hold great hope to restore important spawning habitat for native fish by looking at ways to strategically remove invasive mussels. Some of our future goals include continuing to strategically reduce populations of invasive species such as invasive mussels, hydrilla, sea lamprey, invasive crayfish, and other invasive species, and support ongoing efforts to, again, strategically control the spread of invasive species in specific locations in the Great Lakes. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Todd and welcome your input on how we can continue this work in this particular focus area of GLRI.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the great overview. I will again point our participants to the chat where there are links to a fact sheet on preventing and controlling invasive species that has a little bit more detail building upon Kevin's presentation. Now I'd like to turn it over to both anyone that wants to raise their hand and offer any verbal input or ask a question, or in the chat as well to ask a question and for people to upvote accordingly. We're going to try and focus here on invasive species for about the next 9 minutes or so before we move on to focus area 3, just to try and balance our time for this 2-hour time slot. So anyone want to provide any verbal input on invasive species? All right, I see a hand raised, and this is Tamara Van Ryn. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Chelsea, if you can ask Tamara to unmute her line.
Yes, hello. I'm calling in from the northern part of New York State. We do cover some of the same area in northern New York along the St. Lawrence River. And I just wanted to put a plug in for GLRI continuing to fund work to control forest pests, including hemlock woolly adelgid, particularly as it relates to preserving water quality and water temperature. Here in the northern part of New York State, we're on the forefront now of the hemlock woolly adelgid infestation and are very concerned that our water temperatures and then our cold water fisheries are going to be impacted by this species. And I know a lot of places in the Great Lakes Basin are able to rely on GLRI, particularly for hemlock woolly adelgid control. So just want to ask you to continue to do that. Thanks for your time tonight.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that feedback, Tamara. Very much appreciated. Any other verbal comments or anyone want to add a Q&A specifically related to invasive species, either control, prevention? Is there a species that you think GLRI should do more work on that we haven't? Are there parts of the Great Lakes Basin that you think are the most priority when dealing with invasive species? We're interested in your feedback here. And thank you for all the other questions that are still here. Time depending at the end, we will be able to turn back to some of these questions. And I also note that some of the questions are related to other focus areas, and we can turn to those at that appropriate time. All right, so Kevin, I see a question from Kate Hutchins. And the question is, has there been any consideration of the bacteria that produce HABs as an invasive species? Apologies if that is a ridiculous question. So Kate, no, not a ridiculous question. There are no ridiculous questions. I will turn it over to Kevin to see if that's something you think you can answer.
So I will say that that's the first time I've heard of it. I'm not representative of all the experts out there that are looking at this issue, and I would just again go back to some of our core definitions of what's an invasive species. Invasive species would be a non-native species that causing socioeconomic, ecological, or human health impact. So it'd be good to know more about specifically what you're talking about. The bacteria, is it non-native? And is it by itself or in concert with other non-native species causing those things?
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. So I see another question or comment from Nicole Biber, and I'll read it out. For invasive species, are plant species in inland areas also addressed? Thinking about how something like autumn olive overtakes native species and has a cascade effect on quality of habitat for wildlife, and which is connected to water health in terms of filtration. So Kevin, I'm wondering if with that you can talk about whether or not there is inland invasive species work that we do under GLRI.
So there is, Todd. Again, I'll reference when I gave my opening remarks, where we tend to be strategic when we're supporting control of established invasive species. So just as the question referenced, if there are projects out there that start to link very clearly invasive plant species to impacts to other native Great Lakes habitats and species, to cold water fisheries, to unique communities that are present in the Great Lakes, we do take a close look at those opportunities for controlling invasive species in those instances.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, Nicole, for that question. Let me see if there are any other questions here related to invasive species. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Any last chance, does anyone want to share any verbal comment and raise their hand? Okay, so Kevin, we do have another question that's come in the Q&A, and it's from Patricia Hamill, and I'll read it out to you. After reading Dan Egan's book, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, I'm wondering whether any additional regulations are being proposed to prevent introduction of invasive species, for example, zebra and quagga mussels, into the lakes and preventing agricultural discharge into tributaries that contribute to algae blooms. So Kevin, is that something that you might be able to add a brief response to, or maybe some input on?
Yeah, just very brief response, and not to sidestep that question, but we often work very closely with our state and tribal partners in terms of their regulations that they implement within their jurisdictions. So I would say that's a great question to pose to our state and tribal partners, and GLRI will work closely with our partners to support their work, whether it's regulation or otherwise, so we can continue to prevent the spread of invasive mussels and other species, where there are existing pathways still open for those species to spread across the Great Lakes.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And I'll just reiterate, and I think this relates to a question that Greg Mickelson has also posed. The GLRI is a non-regulatory program. So we are, we use resources appropriated to us from Congress to accelerate Great Lakes restoration and protection and tackle some of these more challenging issues. But it's not our job to pass regulations or implement regulations. In fact, there's just one small regulation that isn't even in the CFR that governs our work on sediment remediation projects under the Great Lakes Legacy Act, is the one regulation that we have. But again, that does not diminish at all the importance of your issue and your concerns, and I appreciate you for sharing those today. So I think we have time for probably one more question, and I see that as Kevin and I were chatting, a few additional have come in here. I am going to just give me a second. All right, so it's not necessarily a question, but Andrea Locke just wants to voice her support for work on terrestrial invasive species and systems within the basin, as this supports and is necessary to maintain the health of aquatic ecosystems. So thank you for that comment, Andrea. Much appreciated. So the other comments and questions that I'm seeing here are related to either future focus areas like focus area 3 or back to focus area 1. So I think it's a good time to hit pause on the Q&A portion and turn it over to focus area 3, non-point source pollution. And with that, I'd like to introduce Danielle Green. She is also with EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office. Take it away, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Todd, and thank you everybody for being here. I am going to be talking about Focus Area 3, which is non-point source pollution impacts on nearshore health. I'm a Focus Area lead along with Santina Wortman, and I will be representing kind of all of the work that we're doing here in this webinar today. And for non-point source, in case you're not familiar with the term of non-point source pollution, it's simply another word for polluted runoff. It's caused by rainfall or snow melt moving over or through the ground. And as the runoff moves, it picks up and carries away natural and man-made pollutants and nutrients, depositing them into the rivers, wetlands, coastal waters, and ultimately the Great Lakes. And in the Great Lakes under GLRI, to be able to address some of these issues, we support projects in two primary sources of non-point source pollution: runoff for agricultural areas and also runoff from urban areas. Next slide, please. First, I'm going to be addressing the agricultural component of our efforts. And under our efforts in the agricultural communities, our primary concern is nutrient runoff, which can cause harmful and nuisance algal blooms, also known as HABs. We focus our efforts on these areas which routinely experience HABs, and these areas primarily are Western Lake Erie, as well as Green Bay in Lake Michigan and Saginaw Bay in Lake Huron. In each of these, agriculture is the primary source of the excess nutrient runoff that contributes to the blooms. Our agricultural projects address all nutrient sources such as commercial fertilizer and manure. EPA partners with state and federal agencies leveraging existing local soil and water conservation programs to provide assistance to farmers to improve management on their fields. So since 2014, GLRI has more than doubled the number of acres, of farmland acres enrolled in voluntary conservation programs in the Maumee, Fox, Saginaw, and Genesee River watersheds. To date, implementation of these practices has reduced phosphorus runoff from these agricultural lands by 2 million pounds. We also support farmer education and outreach, such as demonstration farm networks. The participating farms host field days and tours from neighboring farms and resource professionals to share their successes and lessons learned in adopting new conservation practices and techniques. Currently, GLRI is supporting 8 networks involving dozens of farms in 4 states and is growing. Outreach and peer-to-peer learning is the impetus to motivate other farmers to try these approaches. Looking ahead, we plan to add new farms to the networks, and this work is underway, including greater representation from women farmers and a broad range of farm types such as smaller farms, vegetable and grazing farms, and farms representing greater socioeconomic diversity. In the next 5 years, and you can see this under these future goals, GLRI will continue to support direct farmer assistance to outreach to reduce nutrient losses in agricultural watersheds. And we're going to do this by expanding outreach and demonstration farm networks to improve adoption of on-farm nutrient and management practices, promoting practices that slow down and filter agricultural stormwater runoff, such as expanding buffers to waterways, widening floodplains on drainage ditches, and creating wetlands to protect receiving water bodies. In addition, we will continue to monitor nutrient conditions in nearshore areas and tributaries. We have supported dozens of assessments to better understand nutrient sources and transport within the Great Lakes watershed. These studies help us better target our resources to where they'll be most effective to protect water quality. And one thing to note, both for the agricultural and the urban component, which you can change to the next slide, is that when I say wetland, we really are talking about wetland type areas that are going to act as sponges for water runoff. These are not the high quality wetlands that have the ecological significant importance, because you could not expect something with such high quality biota to also be able to absorb polluted runoff. But with that, these constructed wetlands really are an avenue to be able to soak in the stormwater runoff and keep the water in place and slow it down as it goes on. Moving over to our urban efforts for the urban runoff, GLRI supports funding green infrastructure projects in Great Lakes communities to reduce untreated stormwater runoff and to improve nearshore water quality. Our overall tact is to work with federal, state, tribal, and local partners to slow down and soak up the stormwater runoff and to filter the pollutants. Our focus now, and hopefully under the next plan, is also to integrate climate resiliency. And that's really important with the stormwater runoff, that as projects are designed, we need to be investing in the projects that are designed for current climate conditions and also the future climate conditions, and rain for, not enough rain and then too much rain at the same time. Our investments in green infrastructure include porous pavement, bioswales, rain gardens, and the like in urban areas that infiltrate stormwater runoff. In addition, watershed management projects such as restored floodplains and built wetlands slow down, soak up, and filter the stormwater runoff and reduce stream erosion, as well as protect stream banks and improve and protect water quality. These larger projects are often based on plans that have examined an entire watershed and are strategically implemented to provide maximum protection of the waterways and improved water quality. To date, under GLRI, we have supported implementation of more than 300 local watershed projects in the Great Lakes communities and protected more than 60 miles of streams and shoreline. We've prevented over 511 million gallons of untreated stormwater runoff entering the Great Lakes. And then in our next 5 years, for what we're considering for Action Plan 4, and really, really welcome your feedback on this, GLRI, our federal agencies and partners will continue to accelerate the implementation of green infrastructure projects with a focus on work in underserved communities to be able to reduce the impacts of polluted runoff on nearshore water quality. These projects will capture or slow the flow of the stormwater runoff and filter out sediments, nutrients, and other pollutants before they enter Great Lakes tributaries, beaches, and nearshore waters. And we're going to continue to support the watershed management projects to stabilize stream banks, restore floodplains, and increase forest cover, construct wetland meadows, these built wetlands, and improve water quality at beaches. So that's an overview of our accomplishments and where we're hoping to go. And I would love to hear any feedback or questions that we're getting from those participating tonight.
Great, thanks Danielle. And we've got a lot of questions and comments that are coming in the Q&A section right now. We're not going to be able to get to all of them here today, but we greatly appreciate everyone providing input. I'm going to start with a comment and question that came in from Mary S. And I'm just going to summarize that rather than read the whole comment off. And Danielle, I think you really addressed this through your presentation on agricultural runoff. So I'm going to ask you if there's anything more that you want to add in to address her question. And that is, are water quality treatment BMPs, such as constructed treatment wetlands, stream restoration, designed to optimize nutrient removal, bioreactors, and other innovative BMPs, such as application of non-toxic sediment nutrient inactivation biosorptive products being considered or implemented? So great question. I think you addressed it, but is there anything further you want to add to that?
No, those are absolutely our approaches, and the larger, like those built wetlands or a floodplain connected to a stream or others that will be able to absorb the most amount of nutrients are really what we are trying to prioritize. So thank you very much for that comment.
Lots more questions coming in. I'm going to go to a question here from Stephen Modell, and that is, how much partnering goes on between EPA and organizations like the Nature Conservancy? The latter has some expert projects on restructuring land surfaces and channels to retard runoff, working quite a bit with farmers, including to gain their buy-in.
Much of our investment really does go through grants or funding that goes to agencies that then are able to work with farmers directly, and we work with many partners. If there's some specific areas that the Nature Conservancy or other nonprofits are working, we would love to be able to hear that in the comments. We are always looking to expand our partnerships and have successful ideas kind of snowball and get more successful implementation. So thank you for that very much.
Great, thanks Danielle for addressing that. I'm going to go to a question from Jane Benson. We have a lot of farm-related phosphorus and nitrogen runoff in Lake Michigan, which causes toxic algae blooms. Is the GLRI doing any work in that area to address that?
We are, and I would request that you put this in because there are people who are much more expert than I am in this. But in essence, we are working to prevent the runoff that is preventing the algae blooms. We're supporting a lot of the work to be able to forecast where the HABs are, and are always trying to figure out good approaches to do better, because as we see, HABs are still an issue. And there's a lot of work that we have done. There's a lot more work that needs to get done. If there's some specific areas that you have concerns about, please do let us know in the comments. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. I'd like to turn to another comment from Nicole Biber. Thank you, Nicole, for the comment. Are the stormwater runoff bioswales committed to using only native plant species to also provide habitat for plummeting populations of pollinators?
I love this question, Nicole. We put an emphasis on native plants and we encourage them. There are some places where it needs to be naturalized plants. Let's say if it is the bioswale is close to a street and there would be a lot of salt going in, so we need kind of the salt tolerant. We are always looking for that kind of urban ecosystem co-benefit of being able to supply the plants for the pollinators and the beauty for the community that lives right there. So we are always encouraging and having conversations and helping prioritize native plants when it is appropriate.
Great, thanks Danielle. I see we do have a hand up, so let's take a pause in the Q&A box. And Chelsea, I will ask that you can ask Mary S. to unmute your line.
Hello,
right,
Mary Safranik. The last name's crazy, Safranik.
Sorry, I didn't even try it.
No, that's totally fine. That's very common. I just wanted to ask, so Danielle, that's great. was a little bit early on my question, so you did definitely answer the other question I had. But one other question I've been having regarding some of the treatment type, water quality treatment type BMPs that are being implemented is the dissolved versus particulate kind of fraction of nutrients, particularly phosphorus, being considered. What I've seen a lot of is people look at total phosphorus, total nitrogen, and a lot of times that isn't going to hit the mark when you are dealing with a algal community that is very much vibrant on dissolved, the mobilized fraction of the nutrients. So just wanted to know if that was something that is being considered whenever projects are being proposed and or funding is being sort of distributed. Is that a plan in the future? Because that might be one thing that
Absolutely. The effort to try and get to the dissolved phosphorus is really important, and we are that is a priority for us as well, because really we're looking at the end game, which is kind of the algae in the lakes and kind of working backwards, and the dissolved phosphorus is a really important component for that.
So if I can make one more note, so a lot of times when I see project ranking, a lot of people look at $1 per pound of total. And I just wanted to caution, if there are projects out there that can provide a higher removal of dissolved, that probably should have a different kind of ranking or elevation of the scoring if it's being evaluated, because those projects that just remove sediment are those are easy hanging fruit. It's much more difficult to get rid of the dissolved fraction. So if there are projects that can be elevated because of that factor, it would also increase the $1 per pound of removal, but it just does really get you a little bit closer to the end goal of removing out, reducing algae proliferation. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely noted. Thank you so much for your comment.
All right, thank you, Mary. Great comments. Thank you, Danielle. There is a number of comments still here related to Focus Area 3, but given the time, I'd like to move on to Focus Area 4, Habitat and Species. And if we do have time towards the end of this webinar, we will be able to come back to some of these comments and or questions. So thank you all for being really engaged, and Danielle, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
All right, and with that, I'd like to turn it over again to Kevin O'Donnell to talk about different species this time, habitat and species and or native species. Take it away, Kevin.
All right, thank you, Todd. Now this focus area 4, includes on the ground and in the water restoration and protection projects that improve the habitats necessary for native species that provide economic, cultural, and recreational opportunities for the Great Lakes community. This focus area also supports needed science, assessment, propagation, and stocking of native species so populations of endangered, threatened, or culturally important species are not lost from the Great Lakes. This focus area works throughout the Great Lakes Basin, from upland forested areas to tributaries and rivers, along our coastlines, and in the open lake area. Now, as most folks on this call probably already know, the environment of the Great Lakes region is blessed with wide swaths of forest and wilderness, sand dunes, coastal marshes, rocky shoreline, lake plain prairies, savannas, fens, wetlands, and other landscapes that contain features that are globally unique. These habitats provide drinking water, transportation, power, and a wide array of recreational and cultural opportunities for our residents. The Great Lakes environment supports a world-class fishery with an estimated 180 species of native fish, including small and largemouth bass, muskellunge, northern pike, lake herring, whitefish, walleye, and lake trout. Yet, Great Lakes habitats have been significantly lost or impacted by pollution, development, resource extraction, and invasive species. Now, these losses and a multitude of other threats affect the health of our Great Lakes fish and wildlife, as well as our residents. So next slide, I'd like to talk briefly about some of the achievements we've already made under GLRI for sustaining species. We've increased recovery efforts for a number of species, and we're just listing a few here, including endangered species like the piping plover, native fish populations like lake trout, and native plant species endemic to the Great Lakes, like the lakeside daisy. In terms of our future goals for sustaining species, we intend to continue efforts to promote the recovery of ecologically important native prey fish, for example, such as cisco and bloater, which form an important component of the food web within our open lakes. We also intend to continue to protect and restore habitats that are critical for endangered and culturally important plants and animals. Next slide. And then switching to our habitat, some of the achievements we've made under GLRI to restore or make these habitats resilient include restoring coastal habitat that supports native fish and their nursery habitat, migratory birds, and protects the shoreline for our residents. We've restored and protected other Great Lakes to support a number of native species, provide increased recreational opportunities, and our future goals include continuing to protect and restore native fish, for example, by removing barriers that block their movement within streams and tributaries of the Great Lakes. We'll continue to protect and restore those habitats to minimize the negative impact of future climate change on native species and our residents, and enhance and maintain important cultural uses of restored and protected habitats, such as fishing, hunting, and recreation. So with that, I'll turn it back to Todd. And again, we look forward to hearing from all of you on how we should continue this work under GLRI.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Great overview. I'm gonna jump right into the Q&A and address a question perhaps in a slightly different angle than was originally suggested by Jesse Spurlock. So the question there was, will GLRI provide funding and or support for erosion prevention? I think a lot of that was focused on phosphorus and algae related issues, but Kevin, I thought you might be able to, especially as it relates to this last slide, talk about what Focus Area 4 related work has done for coastal resiliency types of efforts.
Sure, Todd. So I think one of the things we've realized when it comes to our coasts and managing our coasts, well, let me say two things. One is we're dealing with some of the complexities of how we've managed the coasts in the past. And I'm talking about some hard engineering choices, rock riprap, various structures on the coast that have changed the way sediment naturally moves through our shoreline and creates and maintains and sometimes changes our coastal wetlands and other important areas. So realizing that, we've supported a number of our federal and state partners to first collect the needed information. In some cases, we have very outdated information about our habitat and depth or bathymetry in our nearshore areas. So we've helped our partners collect important information in those coastal areas that can be used to inform some hopefully more resilient habitat restoration projects that provide habitat for our important native fisheries, but also provides that shoreline protection from erosion that, again, we see from dealing with our past ways of managing the coast. So happy to give more specific examples, but I hope that answers the question, Todd.
Kevin, thank you. Great feedback. I would like to now turn to another question in the Q&A box, but before I get to it, I just want to remind folks, if you do want to speak verbally, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. So Kevin, this question is from Jane Elder. And her question is, can you talk about any actions you are taking to protect cold and cool water species in the face of climate change, including upstream habitat?
Yeah, thanks, Jane, for that question. And yes, indeed, we've relied on our partners across the basin, our scientists that specialize in looking out into the future in terms of future climate change and how that will impact stream water temperatures. And we're strategically looking at places that currently support cold or cool water species or communities, and trying to take the actions necessary to maintain those into the future. So we've got specific maps of watersheds across the Great Lakes where we feel like we can do this. We can do this through removing barriers so that fish have more access to refugia during extreme future climate events. And then also knowing these watersheds, we can work with local partners to protect upland habitat and its native vegetation. That's important to, again, maintaining hydrology and maintaining that cold or cool water resource.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Nicole Biber has her hand up. I'm going to ask Chelsea to ask Nicole to unmute her line. And once that's done, Nicole, you can take it away.
I won't be surprised about so,
Nicole, can you speak up? I'm having a hard time hearing.
I was just mentioning what I was sitting in the front row and I had a lot but I just wanted to take this opportunity while looking at the of this slide, how it says cultural uses of restored and protected habitats such as fishing, hunting, and recreation, and that's certainly accurate. I also just wanted to mention the cultural uses for tribal nations, for indigenous people. It includes ceremonial. It includes our medicines. The species are all repositories of our stories and our teachings. And so, just to say again, without particular beings and without a flourishing habitat, we don't have our culture anymore. It's not just the words on the page. So thinking about, in relation to that, the need to sort of go beyond a extractive sort of frame of mind of how we interact with particularly keystone species, thinking about wolves very much and all the benefits they provide to a balanced ecosystem. And as well as when I mentioned earlier about beaver and, these species that are seen quite wrongly, I think, as a nuisance. I think it's sort of akin to what Mr. O'Donnell was mentioning about previous practices of the way things were built, the way shorelines were treated, and realizing, those were missteps and sort of need to be stewarded back to a place where it's, less stresses and is allowed to sort of recover in the way that, I think Earth is ready to recover when we sort of, put our hands in stewardship. And I love all these projects, and I'll definitely use it as an uplift, pick me up when looking at the different things this initiative has accomplished. But, just wanting to say that in a lot of spaces where decisions are made about wildlife, it's very entrenched where animals in particular, again, like wolves and like beaver, aren't really talked about in a way that foregrounds restoration, even though they're very critical to long-term functional habitat and ecosystem. So just wanted to say that when we're thinking about species, about those particular keystone species that I think we really need to move past just seeing them as only the purview of those who would hunt them or want to hunt them. They're really critical partners in all of this. So thank you everyone for all of your work. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Nicole. I greatly appreciate that additional input. Kevin, did you want to add anything?
I'll just add that I continue to learn a lot about tribes across the Great Lakes, and I had heard stories of both the ceremonial as well as the nature's medicine cabinet, and referring to certain habitats in that way. And so I've learned that those are other values we need to recognize and incorporate into our strategy.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, and Nicole. Thank you again for that feedback. So in the interest of time, we are going to move on to Focus Area 5. Kevin, thank you very much to all the participants with questions. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Derek Ager. Derek is with EPA's Great Lakes National Program Office, and he will cover Focus Area 5. Take it away, Derek. And just to let you know, we have 14 minutes left. So I know you're going to be brief anyways, but more brevity could help us take some additional input and questions.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Todd. I'll try to be brief. So my name's Derek Ager, and I work alongside Nicole Singleton, who is my counterpart who works on education, part of Focus Area 5, who unfortunately couldn't make it, and Beth Hinchy Malloy, who also couldn't be here. But under GLRI, Focus Area 5, federal, state, and tribal partners have worked together to lay the foundations for future restoration actions by educating the next generation of stewards through hands-on learning programs for the Great Lakes youth, and by supporting assessments of the overall health of the Great Lakes and scientific investigations into the most significant problems affecting their health. Next slide. So GLRI education activities support the overall goal of engaging the next generation and to foster the Great Lakes stewardship and promote conservation. To achieve this goal, GLRI supports projects and programs to educate the next generation about Great Lakes ecosystems, and by developing and implementing experience-based hands-on learning for K through 12 students and teachers. Note, we had a wonderful presentation from Paige about one of these great programs. Since 2010, GLRI federal agencies and their partners have educated more than 650,000 youth. And this also includes 1,300 educators who are trained to provide their students with experiential place-based learning. Under Action Plan 4, GLRI agencies and their partners intend to continue supporting these great programs and focusing on K through 12 education. But also, we would like to teach people environmental and restoration and protection skills through environmental workforce development programs with an even greater focus on underserved communities. Next slide. So alongside education, science is the other component of Focus Area 5. Science is a key foundation to any successful ecosystem restoration and protection program. For resource managers to be able to take action to address chemical, physical, and biological stressors to the Great Lakes, it is essential that we assess the overall health of the Great Lakes and identify and investigate the most significant problems affecting their health. GLRI federal, state, and tribal partners have conducted Great Lakes monitoring and have investigated stressors such as harmful algal blooms and impacts of current and future lake levels, ice cover, and wave energy on our coastal resources. And we are sharing those results and information with managers and stakeholders across the Great Lakes. Under the Action Plan 4, we wish to continue to support targeted science projects and implement programs that will help track the effectiveness of GLRI projects and inform future restoration. Thanks, Todd. Open it up for questions.
Great, thank you, Derek, and great job. You hit everything on point, so much appreciated. I see there was a comment made in the chat box by Stephen Modell, and Stephen, what I just wanted to share is that if you have any great ideas about how the GLRI can do a better job of communicating the results and accomplishments that we've done, we're all ears. We are not able to lobby Congress, so I think your question about federal legislators, I can't necessarily address right now, but I just wanted to let you know that we would welcome any and all feedback that you have for us on how we can be better communicating the results of GLRI. All right, so I do see a question here from Jane Benson. And I think it builds upon a previous question, Derek, that we addressed, but I'll ask it here to see if there's anything further you want to add to that. So Jane has asked, what kind of science investment is being made into the family of PFAS contaminants? Because PFAS binds to water, it is particularly hard to remediate.
So I guess, you know, what we deal with in GLRI is general monitoring and assessment work. So any sort of removal or remediation, that's being handled by a different part of EPA, and is a very large question that everybody is very interested in. We're investing a lot in looking at PFAS in all sorts of media, including water, sediment, air deposition, as well as how PFAS is transferred and transported through the food web is also another big question. So we have worked with state and federal partners, including Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, USGS, NOAA, and Army Corps of Engineers have all been big partners, and we've invested a lot of funds to do that type of work.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Much appreciated. I'd like to go to a question that came in very early in the Q&A. And before I read the question, I do want to remind folks, if you do want to make a verbal comment, to use the raise hand feature in Zoom. So Derek, this is a question that came in from Adam Flickinger. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to just touch upon the question here, and is, how will future GLRI action plans address these challenges? And the challenges are related to climate change through strategies to drive investments to protect ecosystems against extreme and unpredictable weather patterns. So Derek, before I turn it over to you to provide a response, Adam, I think that's a fantastic question, and we're interested in hearing from you and anyone else on this webinar or anyone else out there about how do you think we should do that? So with that, Derek, I know in this last slide you talk about increasing the understanding of the impacts on climate change. Is there anything more that you want to expand upon that to address Adam's question?
Sure. So I will say a lot of the ecosystem health monitoring we do not only through GLRI, but through GLEMPO's base monitoring programs. That's essential for establishing a baseline and tracking how it is changing. So we'll be able to see and communicate to stakeholders how things like contaminants in fish or nutrient runoff, how that's being impacted by climate change. The second, and the way we have been more kind of thinking forward about this issue, is developing decision support tools and models to help explain what future water levels or ice conditions or wave surges will be. So we have worked closely with agencies like USGS and NOAA and Army Corps of Engineers to help develop more accurate lake level models, which will be used in habitat restoration projects throughout the Great Lakes, specifically coastal restoration projects that will have a better idea of what these future conditions will be and incorporate them into their design. So we will be better prepared to face different conditions in the future for climate change. But as Todd mentioned, we're always open for new ideas and things that you think we should be focusing on with regards to climate change.
Great. Thank you, Derek. That additional context is very helpful. And Adam, thank you very much for that question. I am going to use the privilege here to address one final question in the Q&A briefly, and then try and wrap us up so we can finish here at 7. I'm going to give Kevin and or Danielle a quick heads up that this is likely a question more suited to one of you than Derek. And this is going back to a question from an anonymous participant. And I'm not going to read the whole thing in the Q&A, but it's really, are there opportunities for the GLRI to help fund investments in land acquisition and protection projects in the Great Lakes Basin? And Danielle and or Kevin, I'm wondering if you could briefly address that question.
Sure.
This is Danielle. I can take the first stab at that and then put it over to Kevin. We have supported acquisition in few and far between, though, to be quite honest. Often with acquisition, there's so many steps in a real estate process and so many places that things can kind of come apart or need more time, that the places that we've done acquisition through different grant programs have been kind of that last step, because it was a really, really important ecosystem or really valuable place, and we were kind of one of the last puzzle pieces for that. So it is possible, but it is one of the ones that we are more cautious of, just because of the reality of what goes into an acquisition process.
Yeah, and I'll just second what Danielle said. Really don't have much else to add, and there is a history of us supporting our partners directly, or supporting existing federal agency or state programs that are better situated to kind of navigate the complexities that Danielle was talking about. So it is a possibility, and just caution that we'd like to see that opportunity closer to the actual acquisition before GLRI might consider supporting it.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Kevin. Derek, I do note towards the end here, we have received another piece of input here from Nicole Biber. Nicole, thank you for your input related to climate-based curriculum and your comment on the education-based programs. I know GLRI has supported some educational programming with the state of Michigan. If you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out directly to the GLRI Action Plan 4 email box with that question, and we can have our education expert follow up with you. So thank you for that comment, Nicole. And with that, I'd like to move us towards closing. So Derek, thank you very much for both hitting lead off on Focus Area 1 and cleanup here on Focus Area 5. And I know those numbers don't match. So I do want to just touch upon line 5 again briefly. So again, I appreciate all of the comments and the input and the feedback that came in the Q&A and verbally as well with respect to line 5. We greatly understand the importance of this issue to many people, not only locally that may be impacted or are impacted by line 5, but also basin-wide that have those concerns. So again, I just want to note that your concerns are heard, and we will be sharing those internally as we look at Action Plan 4, but we can also share those with our internal and external partners that are more involved in the sort of aspects of the regulatory program for line 5. So again, thank you for that feedback. So we've hit the 7 o'clock hour here in Central Time, 8 o'clock in Eastern Time. I know we didn't get to every question, but please note that your feedback is very important to us, and your questions are. They will all be posted on glri.us. And at some point in the future, we will be presenting some sort of summarized response to all of the input that we received. We're still working on exactly what that means and how we will do that. It will not be a point-by-point question and answer related to all the feedback, but really just sort of from a bigger picture perspective, how that feedback has really helped us. So again, thank you so much for participating today. You are all what make the GLRI so important and so successful. Again, please submit any additional ideas to the GLR Action Plan 4 email address. Thank you for participating tonight. Greatly appreciated. I wish everyone a good evening. If you're near the Chicago area, I hope you're surviving the heat that we are experiencing here today. So thank you all, and good night.